Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Key Timing. I am Patty Artessa, the Director of Public and Government Affairs for AAA Northeast. I would like to welcome our audience to this webinar, which will be an informative presentation on preparing for driving retirement. With us today is Dr. Kathleen Gaulis. She's the Professor and Associate Dean of Students for Westchester County. And we also have Barbara Ward, who is our own Public Affairs Specialist with AAA Northeast, and Barb is based out of Garden City, New York. Welcome, both of you. As many of you may have experienced with your family members, fender benders, crashes, even deteriorating health are red flags that older adults are becoming significant driving risk on the road. Perhaps it is time for family members to have the challenge, but important driver safety discussions with older drivers and their family. Sorry about that. By giving up your keys or not being able to afford your personal ride should not mean giving up your independence and mobility. Key Timing Program is a program that helps older adults prepare for their driving retirement, and we are here to give your expert guidance on other availability, transportation options, and resources in the New York area. This webinar will be recorded and we will have time at the end of the presentation for question and answers. Our first panelist today is Dr. Kathleen Gaulis, and she is the Associate Dean for Mercy College School of Health and National Science. And
Great.
Welcome, Dr. Gaulis.
Thank you, Patty. It's a pleasure to be here today with my colleagues from AAA. I appreciate the work that we've done together over the years. So as an occupational therapist, I've been involved in driving rehabilitation for almost all of my entire career, 30-plus-year career at this point. And my goal has always been to help individuals drive as long as they can safely drive. But it's also important to acknowledge that there may come a point in time when somebody needs to make the consideration about it's time to retire from driving. Research has really shown that we outlive our driving life by about 7 to 10 years. So rather than it coming as a shock, I think it's important that we have those conversations early so that we can plan for it just like you've planned for any other kind of retirement in your life. We all know that professional mobility is important personal mobility is important to healthy aging. We want to be able to get to the things that we need to or want to in our communities. And often that means of getting there is driving our own personal car. However, we also know that there are age-related changes that can happen to our body that can make driving uncomfortable or even unsafe. So we want to talk about some of those things today and some of the things that you can do to maintain your safety for as long as you can, but then also to plan for the day when you may need to retire from driving. Next. Thank you. So there are a lot of physical characteristics that can change as we age, whether that's part of the normal aging process or it may be related to some chronic illnesses and injuries that we have, such as arthritis or something like Parkinson's disease. So we see things in our human body as we age that are related to decreased flexibility or strength that we may have that's decreasing, but we also may see things such as increased pain that's related to chronic illnesses. Well, the good thing is that there are things that we can do about that. When it comes to decreased flexibility, it's important to think about increasing our exercise and our ways of moving with, of course, physician permission, and there's nothing that would contradict you being able to do that. Walking is a very simple type of exercise, whether it's walking the malls, walking the streets, or in the past year in the pandemic, my mother walked her driveway at home because it was the safest place to be. There's also walking clubs that you can find sometimes at malls, or even your senior center, as we return to those, may have some simple exercise classes that you can participate in. It's also important to think about flexibility, whether that's simple stretching or if you're into yoga, or even just sitting in a chair and thinking about the task of driving and how do you turn your head and your neck as if you were looking over your shoulder for oncoming traffic. When we think about managing pain, it's important to consider that when we have chronic pain, it can be a distraction, which means that if you're driving with chronic pain, it may interfere with your ability to attend to the things on the road that you need to. Keeping a regular checkup with your physician, because there may be things that they can do to help you to manage pain or to maybe manage your flexibility. If you have hearing aids, wear them when you're driving, because when we lose hearing as we age, we lose the ability to hear the high-pitched sounds. And those high-pitched sounds are commonly associated with things like sirens or whistles. That's why you've seen some of the police cars these days have these like low-sounding, almost vibration type of signals that go along with the sirens. They make us kind of like feel something before we may even hear something. It's also important to think a little bit about medications. As we age, we end up seeing more specialists, and all these specialists may be giving us some type of medication to deal with our chronic types of illnesses. However, it becomes more difficult then to understand what you've gotten from multiple different physicians. So each of these can have a side effect to them. Your over-the-counter medications can also have side effects to them. So one of the things that we often suggest is that doing what we call a brown bag check with a pharmacist or a physician. This is taking all the medications that you've gotten from any physician, along with anything over the counter that you take, and bringing it to one physician. Let them check, making sure that you don't have duplicate medications that you may be taking from different people, so that you want to ensure that you're getting the best benefits from your medications without the side effects. Next. Vision is another concern that can affect our driving safely. So that as we age, we can see changes in our visual acuity, as well as our ability to be sensitive to light, and also finding that we're more sensitive in some ways to glare that we may see from oncoming traffic headlights or the sun reflecting in our eyes, or people also will talk about sun reflecting on snow in the wintertime is very difficult. So there are several things that you can do to help you to adjust for some of those vision changes. First of all, schedule those regular eye exams. There can be things that have changed in your eye that are able to be corrected and therefore prolong your driving life. Also avoid driving at like dusk and dawn and at night, or when there's poor weather conditions like rain or fog. There's a decrease in the contrast between what we see during those types of weather conditions. And so it makes it much more difficult to recognize something in our environment that we may need to respond to. So the other part of it can be that, again, related to contrast sensitivity, where, you know, it's easier to see something black on something that's white versus gray. You may need to think about turning up the brightness on your dashboard so that you have a better contrast there, and making sure that your steering wheel is adjusted so that you can see your dashboard through the components of your steering wheel. That would make, you know, visibility of what's happening in your car easier for you. Next. Another thing that we oftentimes see is that older drivers may have parking permits for the handicapped parking spaces. This is something that I think is really important that people recognize. It's for parking, not for driving. Take it off your rear view mirror while you're driving, because it can block things that you may need to be aware of in your environment. So if you look at the picture here, if we can go ahead and click, you'll see that the person was standing behind the rear view mirror's placard that was hanging down. So it's the same picture. All I did was took down the parking picture, and you'll see that the driver, not the driver, but there's a passenger in the road. Can you click next, please? So that woman was standing behind the rear view parking, like little type of placard that was hanging there. You wouldn't have seen her if they were driving with that hanging from your rear view mirror. Next. Changes in our thinking is oftentimes what is riskiest when we are aging and driving. It makes it more difficult to respond to things that we need to in our environment because our reaction times can slow down. Reaction times is actually two different components of it. First, you have to kind of see something in your environment to then recognize you need to respond to it and then take an action to respond to it. So that reaction time can slow down because we don't see and recognize the things in our environment that we may need to respond to. It can be harder to ignore different types of distractions in your car, like talking on the cell phone or the radio, or it might be a passenger who's talking to you. But we also see sometimes that people have different types of conditions that are related more frequently to aging that may make some of our decision making impaired in some ways. So people that may have Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's can have changes to their decision-making skills that can impact the ability to drive safely. Next. So one of the things that we recommend is that you think about ways to stay mentally active, ways of using your thinking in non-driving situations. So doing things like jigsaw puzzles or word search puzzles or things that keep you mentally active like book clubs or conversation circles. Learning a new hobby or skill really makes you mentally have to think about being flexible. Computer games with your grandkids, or even like if you have the Wii at home with your grandkids, taking that, you get both the physical and the mental kind of stimulation. There are also some specialized computer training programs that are specifically focused on driving that you may want to consider, but all of these are just ways to stay mentally active in a non-driving situation. Next.
And Dr. Gaulis, that's what we did with my dad. We bought him a computer and we had him do solitaire on it, and then we started downloading different games just to keep his mind active. And it really seemed to make a difference.
I know what you mean, Patty, because my dad used to love doing the word search puzzles, and my mother used to jokingly call it his homework. And I used to say, I love his homework. He's really having to look around the environment. So I was all for it. So she stopped annoying him after that once she got approval. Yeah. So in terms of some tips for safety, this is where I think that you as a group of older drivers have experience that is really beneficial to help you to make decisions about how you can decrease the risk that you're exposing yourself to. So we see things such as planning enough time for your trip. If you're in a rush, we all will make probably some impulsive decisions that don't necessarily improve our safety. The other thing is planning your route, considering the traffic, the weather, and the road conditions. So oftentimes, as my mother will jokingly say, I've got nowhere to go and all day to get there. So if it's raining, I'm not doing that today. I'll wait till tomorrow when the weather's better. The other thing, I've learned from my mom is that she plans her routes. And she actually said she learned this in a driving course that she took. So that what she does is she thinks of all the stores that she needs to go to. And she plans the order of those stores. So all of her stops are on the right-hand side of the road. So this way she doesn't have to cross across oncoming traffic. So she stops at all the places on the right, gets to the end where she knows that she's got a left-hand turn signal, makes that turn back towards home. Now she gets onto all the stores that were previously on the left that are now back on the right. So it's a great way to use her knowledge to try to decrease that risk of kind of crossing back and forth across oncoming traffic. Left-hand turn signals, I know Barbara's going to talk a little bit more. They're perfect. They really help you to minimize that risk because you know you have the right of way in that situation. Also, keeping a safe distance between you and the car ahead of you gives you the opportunity to have more time to make a decision about some critical incident that may be happening in the environment around you. Next. One of the programs that's on hiatus right now because of the pandemic, but we hope it will be coming back around the beginning of the new year, is the CarFit program. If you haven't had an opportunity to participate in a CarFit event, I hope you will consider it once they're back up and running. This is something that we've worked together with AAA, working out in Long Island. I've gone there. They've come up to me in the Westchester area. But the CarFit program is a program that focuses on how well you as the driver fit to the safety features of your vehicle. Those things in your car, like your airbag and your seat belt, are there to protect you. But if we're not in the best position for them, then they won't be able to do their job. So what happens at a CarFit event in the community is that you drive into the CarFit event, you park your car, and a trained technician comes over to your vehicle and goes through a 12-point checklist with you. Where is the head restraint in terms of relationship to your head and your neck? Where is your seatbelt coming across your body? How far are you from the airbag? Can you see well over the top of the steering wheel? How do you fit to the pedals on the floor? So it looks at all these things and offers suggestions to you. 95% of the people that have come to CarFit events say it was somewhat or very helpful with the information that they learned in them. So CarFit events are hopefully, as we said, going to start up again in 2020. Right now, they've been running virtual workshops to give people a little bit more information about them. But I think if you continue to monitor, there's a website, car-fit.org. And if you look at that website, you'll see when the events start to happen in our communities again. Next.
And just some background, Dr. Golis is a certified CarFit instructor, and you have participated, correct me if I'm wrong, in over 25 CarFit events and trained over 150 CarFit.
I've kind of lost count over the years.
Lost count?
I know
now
that. Yeah, we've done them throughout the area, and as I said, I've gone to the Garden City site to work with the team there to do them, and we've also done them in Westchester, all over the area. But they're wonderful events, and we really miss doing those out in the community, and can't wait till we start again. And hopefully, as we said, in 2022, things will be back to as much as normal as possible, that we can safely do those in the communities with individuals. So if you come to a CarFit event, one of the things that you may see at those events, an occupational therapist such as myself may be able to demonstrate to you some different types of equipment that may be helpful to adapt to some of the changes that we see when somebody ages. We only would go towards these types of equipment if we can't make adjustments to the vehicle itself to make you more comfortable. So they're not the first thing that we go to. And I brought out some handy devices here today to kind of show you. So the device that you see in the number 1 is a seatbelt grab. And what that device is it really helps to extend where you have to go to reach for the seatbelt. So if you think when you get in your car, your seatbelt's way back there to kind of grab off the column of the door. And if you've got arthritis in your shoulders like I do, kind of just reaching back there on your own is a little hard. So I'm constantly having to give that extra little shove. But with a device like this, I don't have to reach as far. And what this does is it pulls across your body. It can stay attached to the seatbelt the whole time, and it just eases up where you go to reach for it. I've seen people do the homemade version of this by just taking a ribbon with like wire in it. You can make something very similar to it, tie it around the seatbelt. It just decreases the reach that you have to go for. The second piece of equipment that we have on there on number 2 is called the handy bar. What the handy bar does is when you're going to get in and out of a car, mainly when you're going to get out of the car, it can be difficult to come from the seated position to standing position because there's no place to put your left hand to get a good push off from the vehicle as you go to stand up. On the right, you can use the steering wheel or you can use the door, but there's nothing on the left. So what the handy bar does, I shouldn't have worn anything red today, huh? That didn't help there.
You can still see it clear.
Okay, so what the handy bar does is it goes into the little U-ring in the door of the car. And so when you put it in there, then you can push up off of that and push off the steering wheel with the right hand. So it's like getting out of a chair that has 2 arms on it. Much easier than getting up from a chair that has no arms to push up off of. So this device is a nice device. The other benefit of it is that it has a little slicing tool in the center here, and it's got the ability to break the window with the point that comes on the steel part, which can be important in the event of an accident because our cars have electronic types of features on them that if you lose your electronic system in your car, it may not be able to roll down the window or to be able to kind of get the seatbelt released properly. So that might be something that's helpful.
Where do you purchase those?
These are, you can get this straight from Amazon. Amazon has everything these days, but this is like something from Amazon. It's about, I want to say, it's under $40, I believe. The seatbelt grab is about a $20 piece of equipment. So you're not terribly expensive. We do tell anybody, if you have a device like this, don't just leave it loose in the car, put it in like your center console. So if there ever is an accident, it's not floating around the car because it's heavy and it could hurt you if it flew around the car and flew into you, okay? The number 3 is the button mirrors. Now, these come in a variety of different sizes, and the purpose of these is to try to extend what you're seeing in your side mirrors to eliminate your blind spots. If you come to a CarFit event, the first thing that, well, not the first thing, but one of the things that we'll show you at that event is ways that you can adjust your mirrors to try to eliminate blind spots. If you are not able to achieve that to the best of your ability, then we might suggest looking at something such as a button mirror or a side mirror. I know when we did some of the CarFits out in Long Island, people were saying about the short entrance ramps onto some of the different highways out on Long Island. And that made it difficult for them to kind of really use their mirrors adjusted well enough to see. So we tried some of these with people and they found that they were great. Now, the one thing to notice is that there is a big difference between 2 different sizes. This one's for a truck. This is what you need for your car. It's only about the size of a silver dollar or a little bit less than that. And they usually come with a sticky back tape on the back so that they can be taken off and put directly onto your side view mirror. The place to put them is the lower left corner, so that this way, all it does is provide you more information about what's to that side of your car. A lot of the newer cars are actually coming with some of these built into them now. They come in different shapes. This one's more of a rectangle versus the circle. You can get them at local auto supply stores. They're usually under like $5 for 1 or 2 mirrors. So they're not an expensive piece of equipment. Number 4.
Very helpful.
Sorry?
Very helpful.
Thank you. Number 4 is the wedge cushion. So oftentimes when we do CarFit events, and Barbara can attest to this, we sometimes see people that come in and they've got 2 to 3 cushions underneath them to try to get some height to see better over their dashboard. I sometimes call it the princess and the pea syndrome, where we wonder how many princesses are we going to see today. The problem with those chair cushions that you may be bringing in are that they're the same thickness the whole way across. So what happens with that is not only does it raise the back of you up, it raises your legs up, that your legs can rub against the bottom of the steering wheel then. And that can interfere with if you need to quickly move the steering wheel in one way or the other. So the wedge cushion is just what it says. It's a wedge. It's thicker in the back where your bottom would go, and it's smaller in the front where your front of your legs would go, right behind your knees. So the benefit is that it raises you up without raising the front of your thighs up. This type of device, I've seen them oftentimes like in Bed Bath & Beyond, or you can get them online. They're usually like $20 or under. So they also typically have a kind of fabric on the back of them so that they won't slide around on the seat cushion that you have in the car. So simple things, people try them usually at a CarFit event. We don't sell things at a CarFit event, but it's an opportunity to say, oh, does this work for me? Is this something I should look about getting? Okay, next. All right, medical-based driving evaluations. I was involved in doing these within a hospital environment for many years when I worked in a rehabilitation hospital. But a medical-based driving evaluation is specific when we have a person that has an injury or an illness that we may be concerned about how is it potentially impacting the skills needed for them to drive safely. So this is looking at physical, mental, thinking, or cognitive skills. So what this is it's a type of an evaluation that's typically performed by an occupational therapist or a driving rehabilitation specialist. And it involves two major components of it. One being some assessments that are done in a clinical environment, and the other part is doing observed driving in an on-road or behind the wheel assessment. So when we have people in the clinic, we're doing things like looking at their communication skills. Do they understand and recognize the symbols of road signs and what they mean and what you're supposed to follow or do when you see that type of sign? We also want to look at their thinking skills about making decisions quickly sometimes. And their physical abilities, looking at reaction times, braking reaction times between when they see different lights, colors, lights come up, can they move quickly between brake and the gas pedal in the clinic environment. So some of these are computerized, some of them are just devices that we have that would look specifically at that. We may also be looking at the person's vision through some specialized vision testing equipment that we have. If the person's doing well on all those, then we typically will take them for an on-road evaluation or observation in a car, just like what a high school student might learn to drive in. It's got dual controls. So if I'm the driver assessor in the passenger seat, I have another set of brakes over there that if we get into a situation, I can help to control that situation. We look at the skills that are really needed to drive safely, and our recommendation sometimes may be a piece of equipment that would help that person drive safely after they've had an illness or injury, or it may mean that we suggest some practice that person have, or we may be making the recommendation that we don't think the person has the skills to safely drive at this point in time. So all of that happens with the occupational therapist. It is usually then reported directly to the physician who has made that referral to the occupational therapist. And then we'll have conversations with the person. If the recommendation is it's time to stop, what's next? What does this mean to like you being able to do the things or that you want to or need to in your community? Next. So just like you monitor other aspects of your health, we encourage you to monitor your driving health. Being proactive and thinking about what's changed in you and how can that be something that maybe you have a conversation with your doctor about. Or if you're the adult child of an aging driver in your household, like I was, you know, having a conversation with my parents' doctors about the things that I was noticing. You know, I oftentimes might, you know, when we were home visiting, rather than being the driver of my parents, ask them to take, you know, the drive today. Why don't you drive today, Dad? And it was an opportunity to observe how he was driving himself. As we've said that, you know, being proactive, I think, is important. There may be things that can be done to improve and lengthen your driving abilities, but if not, it's a conversation to start with a physician. As an experienced driver, you use those driving experiences and knowledge that you have to try to minimize your risk. But if your thinking becomes impaired in some ways, then it's difficult to use that knowledge to start to decrease your risk because you may not be really doing well on matching what your capabilities are versus the challenges of the driving situation. The other thing that, two other things just to think about, and we'll talk a little bit more about them on the next two slides, planning for your driving retirement. I think that this is an important step, and I know Barbara's going to go into it more, but also consider creating a driver planning agreement. We can go to the next slide. A driver planning agreement is it's a type of paper, just like you may have advanced directives about how you want your healthcare to be managed if you're in a situation where you may not be able to make those decisions for yourself. The driver planning agreement is really a tool to facilitate conversations about driving and to make some earlier decisions about, well, who do you want to have those conversations with you? Being in the world of driving, when I first found out about these, I thought, well, these are lovely. You know, my parents have got, you know, advanced directives on everything else in their life. Well, let's see if they would be willing to kind of look at these. So I introduced them to my parents and said, well, who do you want to have these conversations with? And they said, well, you're supposed to be the expert. You should be the one we have the conversations with. And about 5 years after my parents signed them, it became really helpful. My dad started to show some signs of dementia was starting in him. And so my mother was getting very nervous about being the passenger in the car. So she said, we've got to stop him. And I was like, okay, well, let's do this out of the point of we love him and we want him and you to be safe. So let's have a conversation. So I sat down with my dad and my mom and I brought out the form. And I said, Dad, do you remember signing this a couple of years ago? And he was like, oh, is it that time now? And I was like, yeah, it's that time now. And so it was a conversation that we started, but it reminded him that he had agreed to having this conversation a much earlier period of time if it came necessary. So the whole form is really focused on that. Who do you want to have this conversation with you? Who do you trust? Whose judgment would you trust in place of yours if they're coming to you and saying, I have a concern? Next. So people stop driving for a lot of different reasons. I've heard the gamut over the years in speaking to senior groups. Oftentimes the first thing they'll bring up is the cost of owning a car. AAA puts out some interesting information every single year about what it costs. And it's about not over $9,000 a year. And you never think about that as the cost because you're putting it out in dribs and drabs. So you don't think about the overall cost of what it is to own a car per year. So if you think about if you weren't driving, that's almost like what your ability to spend on other types of transportation is, that kind of an amount. People will sometimes tell me that they stopped driving because they didn't feel safe on the road. I know with my mom, as I say now, I feel like her world has shrunk. She doesn't feel comfortable driving to a lot of different types of situations and areas that she did before because of the pace of it or the amount of traffic or the amount of decisions that need to be made. She's comfortable in a very small, I would say 3 to 5 mile radius from her home. We see people that also sometimes may have recent injuries or illnesses that may stop them from driving for a period of time or permanently at some point. Or there are people that also the decision is made for them because somebody has told them that they are no longer safe on the road, whether that comes from a doctor, family members, or it may even come through law enforcement if there have been multiple situations that they've been alerted to. So any of these things can have a part of the decision why somebody may stop driving. If you go to the next. So one of the things that we recommend is that people start to plan for that retirement. You know, just like you went through retirement from work, you probably thought about finances and where are you going to live and what are you going to spend your time doing. It's the same thing when it comes to thinking about a day when we may not drive. So we suggest that people keep a list for about a week period of time of the places that they need or want to go in their community. And then start to think about how else could you get there or get that task done if you did not drive there. So more often than not, it's going to end up being a list of alternatives and different ways of doing it. Not one way is going to fit all of those tasks. It may be in some situations that you ask a family member or a friend for a ride. Maybe that's to church on Sundays, or you have a neighbor that goes to the same grocery store you can pop a ride with to there. It may be public transportation if you live in an area that you have accessible to you. It may be in some areas there's senior shuttles from the senior center. or it may be volunteer driver programs or paratransit vans. But again, it's a variety of things to meet what the needs are that you have. And I think, Barbie, you're going a little bit more into some of those types of things and how do you find out about them in your community. And I know that, you know, yes, they may look like they have an expense attached to them, but again, remember, if you're not going to be driving a car, there's over $9,000 a year that you're not spending on the upkeep of a vehicle like that. So go to the next slide for me. So one of the things, and actually I learned this from a senior driver herself. Years ago at an event, I spoke to a woman in the panel I was on who had recently retired from driving. And when I asked her a little bit about like, well, why did you make the decision? And the first thing is that she talked about being the only one of her friends that was still driving. And so everybody relied on her as being the driver when they would go out to something in the community. And then she said, but I'm not enjoying myself because they're all getting to have a drink with lunch. They're not worried about the weather. They're not worried about how are we going to get home and what's the traffic going to be like. She says, they're relying on me. And she was like, I'm not enjoying myself. So what she told me she did was she made what she called a personal transportation fund. She sold her car. She put it into a separate bank account so she didn't feel like she was pulling from household finances. And so she would put every single year what was the basic upkeep of her car or would be of her car into that account. So this way she pulled from there when she was going to lunch with her friends, got car service. They would take her there, they would drive her home. She got to have her glass of wine at lunch. So thinking about different types of things that she needed to get to her community and then using that as a way to spend money on her transportation. Sometimes it was paying for a tank of gas for her grandchild to drive her around and do her errands on a Saturday. Other times it was, as we said, hiring the car service. So using those funds to cover the costs of the alternative transportation that somebody needed. I think that was my last slide. If we go to the next one. So I appreciate you listening today. I know Barbara's going to follow up, but I'll still be around for some questions and answers at the end of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Golis. And I have to say that you bring back so many memories with my dad because we went through the exact same experience. You know, he really was very, very active and he went to church every morning, 7 a.m. And we noticed that the car was coming back with more and more dents. And you confront the individual, you know, him on it, and it's like, "Pa, what happened?" And no, it wasn't me. Someone must have did it. And then we realized he was falling more frequently, and he wasn't as steady on his feet. So that came into play. And so what we ended up doing is we ended up having him get retested, driving tests. We brought him down to motor vehicle. Well, he passed with flying colors. So after that, we spoke to his doctor, and his doctor said, okay, let's try different trial periods. We set up an action plan, and eventually, long story short, it did come to that he realized then that he needed to, you know, put his keys aside and really rely on the rest of us. And he did just what you mentioned. To get to church, he contacted people from the church. You know, we would take turns as family members on weekends, taking them to Costco's or Wegmans or wherever. So it does work out, but it's all about communicating what the options are and really watching over and seeing what is occurring and what's not occurring.
Yes.
So I do appreciate you had so many definite good ideas there that, you know, I think people can take on, and it's wonderful.
Thank you.
So Barb is our next panelist. Barb is a public affairs specialist where she focuses primarily on teen drivers. Barbara has developed and conducts driver training, safety presentations for high schools, businesses, community groups, and public libraries on such topics as impaired driving, handling driving emergencies, distracted driving, and senior driving and pedestrian safety. Barbara attended health safety fairs and community events to promote the public affairs and AAA's programs. Barbara is also a CarFit technician and event coordinator and a New York State DMV approved point and insurance reduction program certified lead instructor. Welcome, Barb, and we're looking forward to what you have to tell us.
Thank you, Patty. And thank you, Dr. Golis. Great information, great presentation. We always enjoy working with you. And thank you for being here today. So I think you gave me the perfect lead-in to talk about planning for driving retirement. And one of the goals at AAA is to keep seniors driving for as long as safely possible, right? And we get many inquiries from our members, whether it's calls or emails, from caregivers, usually adult children. And they ask, when is it an appropriate time for mom and dad to hand over the keys, to stop driving? And it's not an easy question to answer, right? Chronological age is certainly not the determining factor of whether someone is still fit to drive. That depends upon the individual. There's plenty of older, 60, 70, 80-year-old drivers who drive very well. So it does depend upon the individual. And our key timing resources definitely was member driven and created a few years back. But over the past year, year and a half, our public affairs team worked with AAA's training and development team to develop an updated and an enhanced online version of key timing. And they did such a really great job. So I'm excited to talk about it. AAA prides, we take pride in kind of guiding our members every step of the way throughout all the stages of their life. We teach children how to cross the street and ride bikes, and we guide teens through the learning to drive process. And we help seniors stay safe on the road for as long as possible. So it only made sense to take this a step further and make a resource available to help guide seniors and caregivers through the process of driving retirement, but also mobility planning. So let's take a little bit of a look at the research and the data. If you can go to the next, you're on the next slide. Thank you, Mark. So what we can see here, more and more people are turning 65 every day, and that's great news. People are living longer, that's wonderful. Research from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety found that the average driver does outlive their ability to drive safely by 6 to 10 years. And that's why I think it's so important to have a plan in place for when the time comes to retire from driving. If we take a closer look at New York State, we have about 3.2 million New Yorkers who are age 65 and up. And this age group, it's really growing faster than any other group. Over the past 10 years, this age group increased by 26%. And during that same time frame, the state's overall population grew by just 3%. Right? So there are actually now more New Yorkers who are age 65 and up than there are children under the age of 13. Right? And of the over 12 million licensed drivers in New York State, 21% are over the age of 65, so about 2.6 million. Now, generally, older drivers, they're more defensive, they're more likely to wear seatbelts, less likely to drink and drive, less likely to drive recklessly, and even less likely to be distracted by technology. But studies show crash rates begin to increase at about age 65. So if we go on to the next slide, please. Looking at the data, and this is taken from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and this data is collected by, it's collected from police reports, but these are the 5 most common types of crashes that drivers age 65 and over are involved in. And I know when I first saw this, what jumped out at me was the left turns. And I know Dr. Golis mentioned that as well. Left turns, they're risky, they're dangerous for everyone, but more so for seniors. You have obstructed views. Seniors have difficulty judging speed of oncoming traffic. So what we try to tell them is that they can reduce their risk of a crash if they make 3 right turns instead, right? And you can see that in the picture, hopefully. Making 3 right turns, it's going to get you to the same destination. It may be a little bit out of your way, but it does reduce the chance of a crash. Another situation is merging onto a highway. This is tough for a lot of people, but more so for seniors. You know, they could be intimidated by the speed of the traffic on the highway. They may not have their mirrors adjusted correctly or may not be using them right. They may misjudge the length of a gap and they just can't tell whether or not they have appropriate time to get over. Maybe they have trouble turning their head to look over their shoulder. So it can be a little daunting for them, you know, and something easy that they could do maybe is instead of getting on the highway, you know, stay on the secondary roads. Again, it might take a little longer, but it may be safer for that age group. So just some things to consider. And then of course, seniors, as they get older, they certainly start to experience age-related changes that contribute to crashes. And if we look at the next slide, Mark, you know, these are the most common senior changes. And I know Dr. Golis went over some of them, you know, as far as vision and physical and cognitive changes, you know, seniors, they need more light. They need about 3 times more light to see. It's harder for them to see people, to see movement. It takes longer for them to read signs. And then they have, you know, issues with eye diseases like glaucoma and cataracts. It's very common their peripheral vision will narrow. And that's very dangerous when it comes to driving. 90% of the decisions that we make as a driver are based on what we see. So if the senior is not seeing what's going on around their vehicle, you know, obviously they're not going to react appropriately to a situation. All right, so and there are ways that we can compensate for this as far as, you know, not driving at night, making sure your headlights and your windshield are clean, doing frequent head checks, keeping your eyes moving. You know, there are things that can help. All right, physical changes also, you know, a lot of people don't realize that driving does take strength and flexibility and coordination. There's turning involved and rotating. There's leg and hand movements. And drivers who don't get enough physical exercise, you know, they may not have the strength to drive safely. So, you know, you can turn to some of the CarFit, the adaptive equipment Dr. Golis showed everyone, you know, to stay active, to keep fit, to help them get in and out of the car. Sometimes simple things like this can help. All right, and then when it comes to cognition, you know, drivers make about 20 to 25 decisions within 1 mile of driving. All right, so that's a lot. And seniors, you know, they can still make good decisions. They can still make good decisions. It just takes them longer to react or respond. Right? Their age, the age lengthens the time it takes the brain to process information. So whether you may have one of these, you know, age-related changes, maybe all 3, you know, there comes a time that maybe it's time for a professional evaluation. All right, and this is something where you can talk to your physician about your concerns, get the referral for a private evaluation, understand that the private evaluations are covered, they're protected by HIPAA laws, so they wouldn't be reported to the DMV, all right? And if it's something, you know, where the senior waits until they're reported to the DMV and now it becomes a mandated evaluation, you know, that could be a little bit more serious and the outcomes may not be as good as you'd expect. So there are differences to the private evals versus a mandated state evaluation. So, you know, it makes sense to do it early and not wait until it's an urgent matter or not wait until the police report you or a neighbor reports you, because that can be done. And at this point, DMV would get involved. We also want to think about medications as a factor. And if you go to the next slide, Mark, I know Dr. Golis mentioned her brown bag activity, and then that's great to bring medications to the physician to make sure you're not, you know, you don't have duplicate medications. But another great tool that Key Timing gives access to, or you can log on direct, go into roadwiserx.com. This is a fantastic tool. You know, 9 out of 10 seniors take daily meds, and a lot of them take multiple meds. So do they really know how these medications are affecting their driving? You know, did they ask the pharmacist? Did they ask the doctor? Sometimes they don't want to bring attention to this. So it's nice because this Roadwiserx website, it's confidential, and you could do it from the privacy of your own home. And all you do is type in whatever medication, whether it's over the counter or prescription, whatever you're taking, and it will give you a confidential report, you know, a small paragraph on how that medication may be affecting your driving. Is it making you fatigued? Is it causing blurred vision? You know, is it causing any kind of confusion? And it helps. It's a great tool because it will help, you know, advise the person using it, you know, how may this medication not only affect my driving, but how will the meds interact with each other and negatively affect my driving? So it's something that you can look at, and I encourage you to do that. If you go to the next slide, Mark, please. This is an overview of the content that's included in the Key Timing online workshop. And again, I think, you know, one of the great things about this, because there's so many, is that, you know, the senior or the caregiver can go on to this online workshop anytime, again, at the privacy of your own home, but they can run through this together. It has so many great features. You know, we want them to do the research. So there's a mobility planning toolkit where it guides the people right through. You can jot down health issues. If your senior has health issues, is it affecting their driving? Are they on medications? Which medications? How might that affect their driving? You can assess your loved one's abilities. Are they having any signs of struggle? Is there a need for intervention? Right? You know, are you going and noticing scratches or dents, or, you know, are they being involved in a few fender benders in the past, you know, 4 or 5 months? Again, sometimes a simple adjustment or modification in their driving behavior can extend a senior's driving career. So these are things that if you put it down in writing, then you can have the discussion. Or is it something that you want to consider getting an evaluation? All right, the Key Timing online module has a list, a state-specific listing for driver rehab specialists. So where you can go if you feel that you do need a driving evaluation, right? And you can record that, but there's a list statewide of the areas that, you know, we cover in AAA Northeast, our club area. And again, it's one of the really great things is the approaches to the conversation. And I've actually used this myself. This conversation, when the time comes, and I think that probably some of us on this call have either gone through this, or they're going through it now, or you know someone who is. It's a difficult conversation to have, and very stressful, right? And the Key Timing online workshop, it has a tremendous amount of valuable information that's going to help the caregiver have this conversation with a loved one, especially if the suggestion that maybe it's time to give up, you know, if the senior meets that suggestion with resistance, it'll guide you through. Who should be the messenger? It's important to pick the right person. All right, the Golis family picked Kathleen because she's a medical professional, she's experienced with this, and she is compassionate. So, you know, again, this conversation comes from love. Who's the best person to do it? Where are you going to do it? All right, it's important to pick a neutral location so the senior doesn't feel threatened. And I wouldn't suggest doing it with 3 or 4 siblings, one person, all right, so they don't feel like they're being ganged up on. When to have the conversation, make sure you have enough time. Don't bring it up when you only have 10 minutes to spare, all right, that's important. But one of the best things is that there's role-playing scenarios in the toolkit, so you can practice having the conversation. And this is quite helpful because by practicing and doing the role-playing scenarios, you're prepared to respond to any defense that's going to come up. And believe me, the seniors come up with lots of defensive arguments. So you'll be prepared and you'll know how to respond. So important, and probably one of the hardest things to do is to separate the facts from the feelings. All right, so stick with those facts. But another great thing, there is state-specific transportation options for, alternatives to driving. So there's, city, county, town, programs as far as public transportation. There's paratransit, information. There's community volunteer programs. What's the eligibility? What's the cost? Is there a discount for seniors? Is there a particular, place or reason for the trip? Are they only going to take me to medical appointments, or will they take me shopping for groceries? All right, and there's a listing with websites, with phone numbers. And this way you have the opportunity to sit with your senior loved one and jot all this stuff down so you're prepared for when the time comes. There's a mobility worksheet. It's ready, when the time comes, you're going to have all these resources right at your fingertips. All right, you're going to pull it out and then you're going to refer to that. It's really, really important that seniors keep their independence, keep their mobility, keep their social networks. So important for their health. All right, we look at the data. We look at the number of crashes, the number of injuries, number of fatalities. All right, we don't miss the numbers in the data tables. We miss them at the dinner tables. So I know for me, I want my senior loved one at my next gathering at the dinner table. So it's really important that you make time for this conversation and you gather the tools and resources that are going to help both. I think families that work together will definitely have a successful transition. So I encourage you all to take a look at the website when you have time to do it. And I really find that it's going to be a valuable tool. So thank you.
Barbara, excellent information right there. I mean, that planning toolkit is so valuable. It really is. So thank you very, very much for that wonderful sharing all those different ideas. Any questions at this time, Mark? No? Okay. So again, thank you, Barb. Thank you, Dr. Golis. You both did an excellent job. Very informative information that you provided to us. And I think it should help everybody out with dealing with this situation with their family members. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Patty.
This has been a great webinar. Thank you to our audience for your great questions that they did not bring up. I would like to thank Barb and Dr. Golis for your informative presentation. A big shout out to Mark, our behind the scenes assistant. Also a shout out to Janet Brown and Shawnee Jarvis, my co-workers, for helping with the invitation and making this webinar possible. And again, please be sure to visit AAA.com. It has all this valuable information in there for your safety, your family's safety, so on and so forth. For AAA Northeast, I am Patty Artessa. Have a great day, everyone, and please stay safe and well. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.